Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask Willie Live. So, hope everyone is doing well. I see I got a few people on YouTube or Facebook, and a couple of you are joining. Hello, Michelle, Jude, joining via Zoom. Obviously, this is a shifted time because I was away this week, so we have a light crowd today. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask questions. Otherwise, this might be a quick session. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, just go ahead and chat in your question. Don't be shy and don't wait, because what I'm going to do is if there's no questions, then I do it going once, twice, 3 times, and then we're done. So if you have a question, now is the time to definitely go ahead and ask it. Okay, I see Bruce is coming on. So, who has questions?
Willie, maybe I have one.
Sure, Michelle. How you doing?
I'm fine. And how are you?
Good.
Good. Okay, regarding playing rubato, I understood that we can play in time or not in time.
Yep.
When we play not in time, how do we check if we play correctly?
Well, I mean, it's really kind of a feel thing, right? So, like, if I took, let's say, one of my favorites, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Okay, so if I was going to play in time, that'd be 3, 4. Right, you can hear that pulse, right? But now let's say that I wanted to go through the first part of it and just play it rubato. So I could go. And now I could go into time. Right, so you can hear how I went into time. Now that first part where I was playing rubato, there's obviously like a line, right? So if I were to do, right? Right? I mean, like, you're just kind of like, okay, Willie, what are you doing there, right? So there has to be, there's just too much, okay? Think of it like this might be an easier way of thinking about it, like referring it or bringing it back to like language. So if I were to stand up and give a speech, right, I'm going to be basically talking, this, that, and the other thing. But now if every now and again I want to, kind of have, I want to do something that's going to get the attention of the crowd, I might be talking about something and just give it a little pause. But now, and that's fine if I give it that little pause. But now if I am talking like, wow, then we got to make sure that we, right? I mean, it gets to this point where it's like, this feels a little weird and uncomfortable, right? So it's that line. That's the line for rubato. Like, how far can you stretch it time-wise until finally it just feels like, what are you doing, right? And then that, in a lot of ways, that's a personal thing, that's an artistic thing, that's an ear thing, right? So typically when I'm thinking about rubato, I'm thinking about rubato meaning that basically I have some flexibility with the time. It doesn't mean that time just completely, goes out the window. It just means that I have a little bit more flexibility and I can kind of stretch things out a little bit more. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, because I know you've been kind of, I wouldn't say struggling, but yeah, I think you're trying to figure out like what's the nuance of rubato, because you've asked this question a few different times in a few different ways, and there isn't a clear, it's not like I could say, well, rubato is when you take the tempo, you divide it by 2, right? It's like, it's not that clean and easy. So basically, think of rubato. Rubato equals out of time, okay? Out of time, not lack of time, okay? So basically, out of time means if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2 just means you're not going to be following that 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. It might be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So it's a little bit, it's much looser, right? But it doesn't mean that it's 1, 2, right? You're not going to do that, because then you're going to get to the point where it's just going to be weird.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
got
so
it.
much.
Great question. All right, who else?
Willie.
Hey, Jude.
Hey, Willie. I was wondering, how can we, if we can fit that piano accompaniment essentials into our jazz stuff? I mean, I was practicing some of it yesterday, and I just can't see how that could fit in,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not really designed to fit into jazz, okay? So let me back up a little bit. First of all, like me as a player, I enjoy playing jazz probably the most. That's the style that I enjoy playing the most. But that's not the only style that I play. I play blues, funk, rock, whatever, But I mean, if someone said, sit down and play what you enjoy playing, I'd probably play jazz because I find that that's my own personal choice. And everyone's going to have their own personal choice. Absolutely fine. All right. So anyway, that's what I love to do. But I have the skills to be able to teach many different styles, so that's why we learn things like rock, jazz, blues, all of that stuff. In Standards by the Dozen, that's jazz, right? It's cocktail piano standards, jazz standards. In TCI, we start really like kind of more with like a blues improvisation and then jazz improvisation, definitely now into the jazz improvisation. But as we go, we're going to start to then move into rock improvisation. Why? Because when beginning improvisation, the blues and jazz is actually easier to teach than rock and pop. Reason is rock and pop is usually like this. It's not about scales. It's usually then more about articulation, dynamics, rhythm, stuff like that. So we kind of start with that jazz and blues, and that's what we started with in TCI. Now, piano accompaniment essentials, it's the opposite. So in improvisation, I have found that it's easier to teach improvisation using more of a jazz sensibility at first, but when it comes to accompaniments, it's easier to teach more of a rock accompaniment first. Because if I got in and say, okay, we're going to start learning accompaniment, rootless chord voicings, I know you know them, right? But I mean, there's many people that be like, what? And that'd be way over their head and it'd be way too much. Whereas starting with those triads and stuff, that's a lot easier. So with accompaniments, rock, pop is easier to start with. With improvisation, ironically enough, the jazz blues is easier to start with. But then, like I said, what's going to happen is it's going to start to do this, all right? So piano accompaniment essentials, we're starting with that kind of rock pop, but then we're going to start to move into jazz over the following weeks, right? So we start with that initial rock pop so that you know that, and then we start to move into jazz. And then same thing with Confident Improviser. We start with jazz, and then we're going to start moving into rock pop. Now, the reason that I did that is, well, like I said, number one, the way that it works out and what's easiest to teach and to learn for each of those. But then also, it allows you as the player to, once again, be that total musician. Right? Because you just don't want to be a player of okay, all I do is jazz. Right? Well, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you can play rock, pop, blues, funk, jazz, Latin, why not, right? That's the way I look at it anyway. I mean, if you really want to, focus in, hey, God love you, go ahead and do it. There's nothing wrong with that. But I always think that being a total musician and having a little bit of rock and pop in your, bag of tricks, always a good thing to know. Now, the answer to your question of well, how do I fit that into my playing? You really kind of can't, right? Because, I mean, we're talking about that kind of sound, right? So now I could do I could do that. Now, of course, some people are going to want to kill me for that, right? Because they just really don't like that rock sound with the standards. But you could, like I just did. And you see how I'm taking those same sensibilities from PACE, Piano Accompaniment Essentials, right? That first PACE lesson, and I could start to bring those into my jazz playing. Again, though, that right there, what I played, that gets very personal, right? Because as an artist, you want to say, do I really want to rock up jazz tunes? You know, that's up to you. Sometimes it sounds good. Sometimes it's like, maybe not, you know? So does that answer your question, Jude?
It does. And one thing I noticed about this, though, also, is that it causes me to work on inversions. That's, you know.
Yeah.
I thought I knew them.
It's funny that you say that because there's so many, you know, I see so many YouTube videos and other approaches and stuff, and it's all good. Like, this, you know, it's great to have all these different approaches. But one thing that I see is lacking is I never hear anyone talk about inversions and stuff. I hear a lot about how, like, oh, you can learn all these songs, and, you know, if you just learn these progressions or patterns, it's all about this, like, oversimplification of how to play it. But the reality is, if you don't know your inversions, and then, like if you want to play rock piano or pop piano, you have to know those inversions. Otherwise, you're going to hit a brick wall, and it's going to happen very soon. So it's great that you're recognizing that, and exactly that. Like for you, speaking like solely to you right now, Jude, that's exactly what PACE is for you. Is to like learn those inversions. You know, not necessarily that you're going to take that stuff and bring it into your jazz playing. Again, like I said, you can if you want to, your choice. But really, the main thing is, get those inversions down. And then remember too, like we say rock pop, but that could also be like jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. You know, I mean, you could like do like those types of things as well, or like jingle bells. You could take some of those same accompaniment patterns and apply them to tunes that are not necessarily rock tunes. They're just like general, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, jingle bells, you know. But the point is you can apply those techniques to those types of tunes, and that would work well.
Okay. Thank you, Willie.
You got it. Michael, I had a question. When you say go to the third or seventh of guide tones and chord progressions, and you're actually thinking about during actual improvisation, I understand it is a conscious exercise for practice, but I can't believe you're actually thinking about target notes and real improv. Can you please give me your take? Oh, that's a great question, Michael. No, and again, it's always helpful if you look at piano and improvisation in terms of like everything else we do as human beings. And what I mean is like language, you know, like I said, giving a speech, that kind of stuff. Like, again, let's say I'm going to stand up and I'm going to give a speech on something that I know about and something I know well. It might be computers, it might be music, it might be karate, whatever it is. Okay, so let's say that I'm going to give a speech about music. Well, now I can stand up and I can give a speech about music without having to write anything down. I'd probably write down some bullet points or whatnot. But when it comes to like me doing that live, right, I'm not thinking about, well, like what word do I want to say and how do I want to put that word, and I want to make sure I fit that, right, that would be insanity, right? You just would not do that. So while I'm speaking to you right now, like, you know, like if we really think about the human condition here, I have thoughts in my head that I want to get out to you. I have some, like my bullet points, but all of those words, again, all of those words, right, the words I just lined up and said with my mouth, I'm not thinking about each one of them before they come out of my mouth, right? And boy, don't we learn as human beings how we get ourselves into trouble by not thinking about what comes out of our mouth. But the point is, you just cannot think about every single word that's going to come out of your lips. Otherwise, you go crazy. Now, what you will think about is, oh, I got to remember to tell them about this, right? So there might be a bullet point in there that I got to make sure that I kind of weave until finally I get there. Now that I will do in my improvisation. Like I might get to you know, again, like taking Misty. You know, maybe I want to get to that minor major seventh sound there. So like when I'm improvising, I might be thinking minor, major, seventh, and that kind of like leads me into that scale, right? So there will be some thought process going on there. But typically when I improvise, I just improvise, okay? So it's best to think about improvisation in two different ways, not necessarily left hand, right hand, but just thinking about it in two ways, right? One way is practice. That's the woodshed, right? So like you hear jazz musicians saying shedding, right? That's the practice. So you practice your improvisation. You practice focusing on the guide tones, scales, whatever the focus is, don't matter. The point is you do that during practice. And then there's live application. Live application, you don't worry about any of the stuff that you practice. You just play, right? And then just let the chips fall where they may. Now sometimes, and depending on the level of player that you are, like, you know, I might practice something and then in a live application, I might say, hey, look, I want to bring in that thing that I just practiced today, and I might try and do it. Now, I might fall flat on my face in a gig, but I'm at a level in my playing in which I could fall flat on my face and then recover quickly and no one would know, right? So you can do that, but if you're like kind of new to improvisation, you just sit, when you do it live, you just improvise. You don't worry about, you know, all the stuff that you were practicing. You just let it come out, right? But during practice, that's when you focus on it. So hopefully that clarifies some of it for you. The main idea is this, is that when you're improvising live, no, you really shouldn't be thinking about, well, what note am I going to hit? It's just, it's too much, right? It's just too much for you to think about. When you improvise live, just improvise. You're going to make mistakes. We all do. It's fine. You just live with it. You move on. Okay, whatever, right? And then after the gig is done or the session, you say, hey, you know what? I want to like work on that, right? And then that's where then during practice, that's when you say, okay, now let me go through and focus on this, and then focus on that. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Any other questions? Going once.
Hey, Willie, I got a comment.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, well, this is an observation. I'm working on the all the things you are in the improv, and I'm working on doing half the improv live, and half of it composed.
Yep.
So the composing half is based on the things that I'm picking up in the confident improviser, and to get comfortable with the live improv, I'm constraining myself in the beginning to say chord tones.
Yep. Okay.
With maybe a chromatic approach to one of the chord tones.
Yep.
So that gives me the freedom to, well, I know the chords, so without having to remember anything like scales or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that. But what I'm finding is in composing, and it's kind of funny, I'll come up with a good idea, but then I go to play it. I can't play it because I'm not technically skilled enough. I'm coming up with better, more complex ideas than I can actually handle technically, which tells me, well, I got to balance my practice to not forget the technical, working on technical part of the piano playing as opposed to the improv.
Well, and you know, first of all, it's great that you're. What I love so much is I love working with each of you, but I love seeing your progress, but I love seeing your mental progress as well, right? Because too often we think of progress here as just being a physical process, right? It's like I can play it, I can't play it. But this mental process of now you're cluing into something very, very important, and that is that, oh, okay, theoretically I can be here, but technically, boop, I could be here, and right? And they don't quite match up, right? So you could either, you know, some players might consider that theory stuff as like, oh, well, like there's certain stuff I hear in my ears, but I can't play it. I would relate the hearing in your ears or the theory to be the same thing, right? Theoretically, you understand what you want to do, or you kind of hear the idea in your ear, right? And then that's up here, but your technical playing is there. You're absolutely right, too, about the technique, and that's why one of the things, it's really kind of a hidden in a way, but this right down here, this Willie's method, this is why, you know, foundational, fundational, super important. And you see here, technique is all part of that foundational, right? So rhythm and technique are the first two things. Reading is important as well, right? Because, and then even if that's just lead sheet reading, but the reality is that, like, if you don't keep up your reading skills as well, well, they can really suffer. And then, well, now at that point, you could really get yourself into a jam. Yeah, it's great, everything that you know, but if you're on the gig and you got to read a lead sheet, and you haven't read lead sheets in years, you know, you could get yourself into a little bit of a problem. Whereas, like, you see all this stuff down here, song, style, concept, that's all the fun stuff, right? So we end up focusing on this quite a bit as piano players because it's what's fun. But this stuff up here, the red stuff, super important to be working on that as well. So it's great that you recognize that. You got piano essentials, you got chord essentials. Those are two great courses right there for keeping up all of your technique. The other thing I don't really mention that much is, let's say you go through piano essentials. You're like, Willie, I got all 12 major scales. I got my minor scales, 2 hands, 2 octaves, contrary motion. I can play the chords. Okay, well then, 6 essential arpeggio exercises. That's a great one. Go through all your arpeggios. Then there's an advanced technique boot camp in which now you're doing stuff like playing scale. Right? I mean, that stuff right there, that'll keep you going for quite a long time. You start doing different scales, you start doing chromaticism, you start doing arpeggios while doing different things in each hand. You got plenty of stuff right there to keep you busy. But Piano Essentials is the place for that.
Great.
So, but that's great that you're recognizing that, and I appreciate that you share that as well, because I know that there are other players that, you know, they recognize the same thing, they don't share it. So it's just good to kind of put out there so that everybody feels, you know, because it's one of those things where, like, yeah, you can, like, hear and understand all this stuff, but then you can't play it. And the problem is that gap right there is filled with self-doubt, right? Yeah. That gap is where it's like, oh, I'll never be able to get there. I can't do it, right? And then the reality is that, you know, that's what fills in that gap. And that's what keeps that gap there, is that self-doubt. Right. So you want to get rid of that self-doubt. You can most definitely do it. Now, there might be a physical thing. You might have to physically sit down and practice for a couple of weeks to really kind of get that technique up there. Yeah. But if you do, then that gap goes away.
Well, it's interesting because I read an article about age, you know, because now I'm up, I just turned 70, not too long ago, and what when it comes to learning an instrument, what does age play in it?
Yep.
And one of the only things that age really comes into play is the brain connection to the fingers. Yeah. It's not as fast, so you're not going to play as fast as some younger player. Yeah. But that's okay. You can still play pretty fast, but you're not going to be as fast. That was the article.
I remember seeing Dave Brubeck at the Newport Jazz Festival, and Dave Brubeck was always like such like a sweetheart of a guy. He just like always seemed like you know, your dad. You know, he was like just like a nice. I remember I'm backstage at the Newport Jazz Festival, and he's there. He's eating corn. He's got corn all over his face. It was just a very human moment to see this player who like has this like incredible career behind him, you know, just being human. And I look at Dave Brubeck. He was not a young man when I saw him, and he could still play his you know what off, right? So you're absolutely right. It's like, you know, like when you look at speed, if it's about speed, well, first of all, I'd immediately say, well, you're looking at music the wrong way, because if it's just about speed, well, for crying out loud, we could program a computer to do this, and it'll do it faster than any human being could ever do it. You know, so it really has to always be about this, you know, like the emotion in there. And there's still plenty that you can do, you know, even if it's not super fast. I remember hearing Barry Harris doing In Walked Bud, and that wasn't fast, but, you know, still swinging. You know, and that's the main thing. When it's still swinging and swings hard, that's pretty cool.
Hey, I was watching Gene Harris when he got up there in years. He didn't slow down.
Yeah, yeah.
But he was playing stuff that he's played his whole life. So it's kind of, you know, the brain the neurons are already there.
Yeah.
The pathways are already pretty well set.
Typically, what I find is the older you are to start, okay? So the older you are getting started. So I have one of my homeschool piano members, and I'm going to say probably he's like in his 60s, you know, or maybe early 70s, and he just got started. Well, you know, first of all, I give him a lot of credit. That's great, starting, you know, at later in life, and I think that's awesome. The full disclosure is, geez, you're starting like fine motor skills at like 60,
Right.
70 years old, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to understand that you can only, right? It's like, you know, like now if he sticks with it for years and years, just because he might have started at like, let's say 65, right? Or 70, he gets to 75, but he does 5 years of consistent practice, he's going to get better. Now, is it going to be like at 25? Of course not, right?
No.
But what he gains, like what he's lost, he gains by this and by
Right.
this, right?
Yeah.
Because at that age, you start to realize that this is what I want. This is important to me, right? And now you have the mental capacity to stick with it, and you have the life skill of understanding that, okay, things take time. Let me be patient with myself. You know, you're usually a little less, you know, impatient. So it's all a balance, you know? So
Yeah.
it's good that you
And I
recognize
think what
that.
was also a positive thing for older people to take up an instrument is the benefits.
Oh,
to brain-
huge benefits, yeah. My father passed away, and he had Alzheimer's. And, you know, the interesting thing is he always played piano, but as he got later on in life, he wasn't playing piano as much. And I wonder, had he been playing piano more, if that would have kept his brain a little bit better. I mean, the research is already out there. It's
Right.
without question that music
Exactly.
helps, keep those pathways active.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right.
I think there was the top three were you learning an instrument, learning a foreign language, or learning to draw or paint. Those were the top three
Okay, yeah.
for protecting the brain at later on in age.
I can imagine too, like if you learn to paint
So-
with your opposite hand, that would probably also be like like if you're right-handed and you learn to paint with your left hand, right? Tell me that's not like a brain,
Really.
scrambler.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Well, just keep plugging away at it.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. Michael asked me a question. Are you able to give a live concert of total improv not based on any standard or prior tune like Keith Jarrett? How does he do it? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, so that would be like, if I sat down and I'm like, all this stuff, I'm just like kind of improvising on the spot. So how do you do that? You do that, and ironically, if you go to my YouTube channel and you go to the main channel page, there's an improv that I did years ago, and that was all improvised on the spot. Right, so you could check that out there. And then basically how you do it is there's a couple of ways. Number one, like I was talking about with Bruce, you have to have a certain level of technique, right? So that whatever you're hearing or thinking in your head, you can actually do. Because if I'm like I want to go like run this all the way up, like super fast, and I'm like, oh, and I can't do it, well, then now I'm in a live situation and I'm doing something that I can't do. So you always have to make sure that you're gauging what it is that you're hearing and what you want to play, and be basically A-Bing that against what you know inside your brain and in your fingers that you can actually do in that moment, right? So you always want to gauge that. So then what I sit down and like, it might be by ear, it might be by progression, it might be a certain style. Like, maybe I might want to do like, Right, so I might start with like something like I want a rhythmic pattern going on. It might be a chord, it might be, major versus minor, it could be anything. Usually when I sit down to write music, I sit and I write by starting to just play. I'll just put my hands down and start playing something and then kind of see what comes out. Then I start to shape it into like maybe a progression, a song, a pattern, because otherwise if I don't do that, it's very simple to just come up with stuff that's like. And it's like, whoa, like there's nothing to hang your hat on. It's like all over the place. And, there's a style for that as well. So artistically, you could go that route, right? I mean, like you could do the Cecil Taylor thing, which is like more stuff like that. And it's like completely outside of any kind of progression. Usually what I like to do is I like to find something that you can hang your hat on, right? So you might be the... Right, so it might be a progression or like a sequence of chords that then the listener has something that they can kind of sink their teeth into, right? And that's pretty much what Keith Jarrett is doing as well. If you listen to the Cone concert and his other, solo albums, same thing with Brad Mehldau as well, they probably go in with a general idea. It could be completely improvised all on the spot. They're incredible players and they have the skill set to be able to do that. But they might go in with a general idea of what it is that, they're looking at. They might have a general progression as well that they're going to play off of. Or it could just very much be like, they hit one chord, they move to another, and then it starts to just kind of morph into something. But what you will notice most of the time with this stuff is that they start to settle into okay, now here we are in this little pocket. And then it's like, whoop, something happens. Okay, whoop, now let's go over here. Now they settle into this for a little bit. Whoop, and it's over here. Okay, now let's go over here, right? So they like kind of settle into these different, ideas for a little bit. You listen to Keith Jarrett at the Cone concert, most definitely. You hear he'll get into a groove. He's like, improvising, playing over it, and then he hits a chord, and then it's like, okay, now we're going someplace else. So that's pretty much the idea of what's going on there. Oh yeah, Martha Argerich. You know what? Funny, I'm not familiar with who she is, Jude. Who is she?
Well, I read about her quite a bit, but I probably can't repeat anything I read. But what's his name now? Oh gosh. Anyway, she's from South America, and she's just an incredible player. She's 80 years old already. And I've never seen anything like her. I think she's just phenomenal,
Yeah.
Classical. And on YouTube, they have things about her life that I never knew.
Interesting.
And she's extremely interesting. And Rick Beato, I think, did a whole program on her. And and I just really admire her.
That's nice. Let's see here.
Feels weird picking it up. The legacy of that shield is...
Awesome. That's great. I'm not going to play too much before YouTube dings me here. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that link just in the chat area, just in case anyone whoops, just in case anyone else wants that, and they can find some more recordings of her. That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Jude. You know, Miriam McPartland, she's another one too. You know, she's a great player, and you know, and it's funny, like, you know, age. What's unfortunate is that there are too many great jazz musicians who died before they got to that ripe, you know, age of 80 or 90 or whatever. So you don't see as many of those jazz musicians that, you know, later on in life. But yeah, there's plenty of them still, though, that, you know, most definitely that, you know, played till much later. And, you know, even though they might have slowed down a little bit, still sounding great. Yeah.
Hey, Willie.
Yeah.
Going back to that improv question, how do the film composers do it? Do they actually compose as they actually watch the movie to get the feeling and the emotion and everything?
Yeah. Well, one thing to remember is anytime we're talking about composition, improvisation, and remember, composition and improvisation are really the same thing, right? I mean, if we really boil it down, the only difference between composition and improvisation is, and this is actually really kind of good to talk about. First of all, improvisation, none of it is just like open up and divine, you know, intervention from the gods, or like somehow like I had no idea how to play piano and I sit down and like now I can, you know, somehow amazingly improvise. It doesn't work like that. All right. So that means that improvisation most definitely can be taught, and it can most definitely be learned. So when you sit down and improvise, you're basically going into your library of everything that you've learned and heard and experienced and all of that, and it comes out on the spot in real time. Now, if I go back and I say, okay, let me now like start to tweak this a little bit or look at it again, and it's no longer in real time, then it's composition. So really, improvisation and composition are the same thing. Another way of looking at it is composition is improvisation slowed down, right?
Right.
So anyway, when it comes to improv and composition, every player is different, right? Now, there are certain buckets that you kind of get into, right? So let's start with the genius bucket. You know, I heard that Mozart used to write the parts out before he wrote the score. Now, just imagine that for a second.
Yeah.
The way most symphonic music is written is the composer will write the score so they could see how everything, you know, like all lines up together. Oh, yeah, no, not Mozart. He could see all of that in his head and have it all in his ears and write out each part individually, then put the score together. That's genius, right? That's a level of like, yikes, like crazy level. Then you have players that will just kind of like it would be more organic. You know, I feel like I'm kind of like that kind of player where it's like I'll just sit down, start to play, you know, might watch something, start to play around with some ideas. Typically, film composers are going to have like some kind of setup, some kind of MIDI setup. They might throw on some different patches and sounds, start to record a little bit, start to like have their music software and take little notes of ideas and themes that they want to start to develop and build from there. Now, other players will look at it from a very structured, like theoretical standpoint. Okay, like I want music to start here and to go to there. That's 1.5 minutes. That's going to be this many measures. I'm going to, you know, because then like with film music, you could break it down. It's very mathematical, right? Because you know, if you're at 60 beats per minute, that means that each beat equals 1 second, right? So if you had something that you needed, like, I don't know, 12 seconds of music, that would be 3 measures of 4/4 time in 60 beats a minute, right? So some players will kind of take that approach, in which it's very mathematical and very organized. So it's really up to the player. You know, another way of looking at it is singer-songwriter. You know, some singer-songwriters are going to write the lyrics first, then they put the music to it next. Some hear the melody, right? And then they put the lyrics to the melody. Some hear the chords first, you know, the progression. Then they write the melody over that, right? So it's just, it really depends. There's no one particular way that any player, like everybody doesn't do it the same way. Now, as a little side thought on that, like for instance, I'm a kind of player like I like coming up with a progression before I come up with a melody. But what a great exercise for me to do would be come up with a melody first, then put a progression to it later, right? So whatever it is that you're least comfortable doing, try doing that as an exercise and then back up from there. One thing that I like to do is I like to write in odd meters, so that kind of forces me to practice and be able to play in those odd meters. So rather than playing in 4 or 3 or 2, playing in like 5/8, or 11 or 13, different combinations like that. So anyway. Make sense?
Yeah.
And then Michael asks, can Yuya Wang play jazz? I'm not sure. I'd have to take a look at her stuff. But anyway. All right, any other questions? Going once? Twice? Okay. Thank you guys very much for joining me for Ask Willie Live. The replay will be up in the community area. And just as a reminder, starting at, 1 o'clock here, I believe? Yeah, at 1 o'clock we're going to be doing Jazz Edge Core live. Just a little quick reminder, I'm changing the name of the TCI, Standards by the Dozen, because now that there's Piano Accompaniment Essentials, I'm just calling that every other Thursday session Jazz Edge Core, all right? So there'll be a Jazz Edge Core Q&A session, and then really it's like anything for Jazz Edge Core, even Piano Essentials, if you have any questions about that, right? And during Jazz Edge Core, I will give feedback on playing if you want to play, as long as it's something having to do with Jazz Edge Core, right? If it's just something else, then I would reserve that for the Tuesday coaching session. But anyway, I'll be on again at 1 o'clock. Just go ahead and check the site. The link is right in there. And that's it for me. All right, everybody. See you guys later. Have a good one, guys.